Danielle grew up Jewish, and so that's why she firmly believes in telling the stories of the past so future generations can learn from our trials and tribulations. So Danielle worked at a children's publishing company as the social media coordinator for over 3 years, several Chicago area newspaper companies, and she's helped many small businesses with their digital marketing. What's really cool to me right now is that looking around at the 9 people I see here, there's so much of that overlaps. With what so many of us do or have done, which is what's really cool. One thing that I don't know who else on the group has this in common with me, but I have about, even though I write and help other people tell their stories, I have about 6 versions of my own book that I have never done anything with except resave as a new file name every couple of years. So that's one of the reasons that I'm curious, but I also want to know everything that you do, Danielle. So you go for it.
Nice. Okay, so I have been giving a talk. I actually just did a longer talk in my Facebook group. I'll leave the link. It's a free group. It's called Unleash My Book. So I'll leave that in the chat if any of you guys want to join. I do have a lot of free trainings in there under the unit section. Today, I know we just have about 10-15 minutes or so. So there are 3 ways that you can 3 ways that I like to implement, I talk about with my clients when starting a book. So the 3 ways are: 1, decide your main theme, which is also known as the promise or argument. 2, decide on your target audience. And 3, decide on your goals. So now we're going to go into each of those areas in a little more in depth. Okay, so when I say decide your main theme, especially with nonfiction and memoir, some people call this the argument that you're making. Some people call this the promise that you are giving your reader. So same thing as when you read an article. If you read a how-to article, if you read a recipe, they're giving you information. And sorry, my husband is making lunch. So they're giving you information that you can take, and you're reading that article because of what the promise was from the title, right? That's from an article. When you read a book, you know from the very start what you are going to learn throughout the book. What is that promise, right? So one example that I really like to go and look at is Dani Shapiro. Dani Shapiro is a famous memoirist. She has about 9-10 memoirs. If you haven't heard of her, she's Jewish as well. One of her latest memoirs is called Inheritance. And the reason that I think this is important is because a lot of clients, a lot of people who I meet at different speaking events, and before COVID, I did have several speaking events at different public libraries and meetup groups particularly in the Chicagoland area. And in Inheritance, she finds out one piece of information. She finds out in the very beginning that her father, the person who she grew up with as her father, was not her biological father. Okay, that is the whole theme of the book, is family, religion, how she views herself, right? The ideas about her individuality and what that has to do with that, right? So the reason that I find this crucial to point out is because if you've lived everybody has multiple stories, right? Everybody, just like Randy, what you were saying, everybody has, 10 books that you could write, 10 articles you could write about different life events. What I find is that if somebody tries to incorporate everything that they've learned, all the life lessons, into one place, what happens is there's no clear direction in the writing, and there's not enough clarity, so that then the reader gets lost, and the reader doesn't want to finish the book because the readers thought they were being promised one thing, but then you go on and talk about all these different things that have also happened, right? So that's my little nugget for making sure that you are concrete and clear about what that main theme or promise is in the beginning. So these three things that I'm talking about today, well, these are the three main things that I always talk about when I start working with clients. My favorite types of clients to work with are ones who actually haven't written anything yet, that everything's in their head, or you have, 10 drafts and nothing is complete and you don't have clarity, because we talk about these three things in depth, right? So number 2, decide on your target audience, right? And I'm looking down at some notes, so don't mind me doing that. So I want you to ask yourself, who do you truly want to impact with your story? And how will you do this? Okay, and I also want you to remember that your story just needs to resonate with one person. So one of my coaches, she has said multiple times, if you are not polarizing, you cannot magnetize. And I love that phrase, because if you say, oh, I want everybody to read my story, I want everybody to read my book, then what's going to happen is the same idea as what we were talking about with the message or the theme. If you have so many different directions you can go in and so many different people you could impact, then it's not, the message that you want to share is not going to be as clear. And that's one of the main reasons why we have to come up with a target audience, right? There's a whole philosophy, there's a lot of different ways to do this. I'm also, I also want to urge everybody to not necessarily say to yourself, oh, I can only reach one person, or oh, I can only reach one type of person, right? But what I work with my clients on is that we talk about what that one person looks like, so then we can get clarity about who that target audience can encompass. And then after we niche down, we can build up again, right? So that's really important to think about in terms of, for example, are you trying to reach, I have a client right now who's like, I know I want to reach childless women in their 40s and 50s who have had very successful careers in corporate, right? That's very specific. And that's great because she knows exactly who she wants to target, right? Do you want to target moms of boys, right? Or do you want, you know what I mean? So these are some different ideas, different ways you can start to think about who needs to read your story. Okay, so then number 3, decide on your goals. What is your goal after you publish your book? Do you want to elevate your speaking career? Do you want your book to become a digital course? Do you want your book to resonate with your family and friends? So if you don't know what your goal is, then what happens with, I've noticed with my clients, with a lot of people who I've come into contact with, is that your writing is not as clear as it should be in order to reach and achieve those goals that you desire, right? So these are the types of things that we talk about in the very beginning so that we can achieve those goals with a finished manuscript, right? So one of the goals also can be, I want to get a literary agent and I want to be traditionally published, or I know I want to self-publish. I know I want to use a hybrid publisher, which is, there are a lot more popping up nowadays in the last, I'd say, year or two. And there are a lot of different aspects about what those goals entail, and none of them are wrong, right? One of the other things that I would think about in terms of your goals is pick 3 to 5 books in the genre you want to write, and look at those books and see what you like about them, what you don't like about them, and what that author has done to reach their goals, right? We don't want to go on the road of comparing necessarily. We don't want to only compare ourselves and say, oh, we're going to compare ourselves to Dani Shapiro or Saba Tahir or Joanna Penn, right? Because we're in a different place than they are. You know, we're at a place that they were at, you know, 10, 15 years ago even. Okay, so that's something to be aware of as you're looking at these other books in your genre. But at the same time, this is important because you will discover things when you look at it from this particular eye rather than just the reader. You're looking at it from a more critical standpoint. You're saying, what did they want to achieve with their book, and are they achieving it? Like, can I tell that they're achieving this, right? So, you know, there aren't any wrong answers, right? So that's why it's so important though. If you don't know, if you have a finished manuscript and you don't know what you want to do with it, a lot of times that's because you were not clear in the very beginning of what those goals were, of what those goals are, right? Of what you want to achieve with that writing. So I have some clients who are like, oh, should I do blog? Should I do guest post? Should I do speaking? Should I be on podcasts? Should I, you know, there's so many different ways, so many different avenues, so many different, you know, ways to get your story, get content out into the world to the people who you know you need to serve. And the way to do that, so one of the ways that I always tell my clients to do, and we work on this together too, is journal. And it sounds very simple, right? But if you don't journal currently and you know you have a story that you want to share, then I urge you to start journaling. Because what happens is, and also I also recommend doing this with a pen and a paper and paper. You can do it on the computer, but what I know is that when we write with a pen and a piece of paper, it is much more difficult to lie to ourselves. It is more difficult to say something that's untrue about what we want to achieve. If you are not spending any time journaling, if you're not spending any time getting that clarity for yourself, then I want you to consider starting to do that, right? So I have whole other ideas. You know, I did a long visualization exercise with one of my clients a couple of weeks ago, and she literally said at the end of the session, which was really, really great, I thought, she was like, I feel lighter. I don't have a pit in my stomach anymore, because we were going back and forth on different things that she wanted to do, right? So, you know, this is part of another training that I do called the writer's mindset. But what I'll share with you with that is I call writer's block the writer's mindset, because I truly believe that when you feel blocked, it has everything to do with what is circulating in your mind. It doesn't have to do with what you want to write, right? So what I always recommend with that is acknowledging, just acknowledge, that's the first step, is acknowledging that fear and acknowledging the limiting beliefs that are preventing you from reaching that overall goal that you are gaining clarity on. Okay, so are there any questions so far? I know I've been talking a lot.
No, that's great. We don't have any questions right now. What strikes me is that that very last stuff you said is stuff that I have heard Tom Heil say. I've heard Jeff Jones say, thinking about the limiting power. I love what you said about writing, and pen and paper is what did you say, that we have a very hard time lying to ourselves when we write with pen?
Yes.
Yeah, that's amazing. I've never heard that as a concept, but it makes complete sense.
Mm-hmm.
So if people do come to you with a complete manuscript, or what they think
Mm-hmm.
is a complete manuscript, then
Mm-hmm.
what is that process? How do you get
Mm-hmm.
back to these three things when they think they're done? And maybe they are.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, I'll answer your question and then I'll go to Lydia's. Lydia just asked a question too.
Perfect.
So that is a great question, Randy. I would say that first off, we would probably sit down and do a manuscript evaluation. So that's like the first thing that I would do. A lot of my book coaching clients, I combine with developmental editing. So what that is that I have coaching sessions and I give them homework based on, word count, page count, chapters. We talk about all of that. And I go through their manuscript as we go through it together and developmentally edit it for ideas, structure, organization, all that kind of stuff. If somebody has a completed manuscript, then I normally go through and say, okay, this is going to be the price for doing a manuscript evaluation and giving overall ideas. Usually that's a 10 to 15 page document that I'll provide, and it's very detailed because I want to make sure that you know what the issues are in the manuscript that need to be addressed, right? So we talk about that in depth. We talk about tone. We talk about, time. I find that in a lot of manuscripts, time is an issue in terms of how time is presented to the reader. So that's actually a very tricky issue that we talk about. Oh, I like the idea of journaling. For the first time today, I wound up, oh, wait, let me read this comment and then I'll answer. Did I answer your question, Randy?
Yeah, that was great. And for the people who can't see it, Danielle's getting ready to read a great thought from Barbara.
Okay, so Barbara says, I like the idea of journaling. For the first time today, I wound up inadvertently doing that by telling a fellow writer that I was writing through a particular character's eyes. As I did, the reason hit me for the first time. So I was journaling out loud after a fashion. Ah, very cool.
Nice.
That's
That is
awesome.
something I will tell people to do if they are having trouble, if they feel like they're not a good journaler, I guess, is to start by just talking into their phones and just rambling, and
Yeah,
then
and a great app for that is Voxer. If you guys haven't heard of it, that's like one of my favorite apps now. It's basically a walkie-talkie app, and you can use it for yourself to take voice notes as well. So if you're out walking your dog or something and you think of an idea, you can literally just take your phone out and record yourself, and then
very,
you can listen to it later. So that's really nice.
very
Okay,
cool.
so I want to get to Lydia's question
Yeah,
too.
absolutely.
Lydia says, do you have tips for narrowing down a book idea when you have several topics, audiences in mind? Okay, so yes, but that's more than a 2-minute conversation. So I'll give you a very short version. So what I would do is, again, if you have like multiple book ideas, I would journal about what those different ideas look like and like how you could potentially map those out. So like, one exercise I would consider is just doing a brain dump on the different book ideas that you have in journal form or in voice form and see what like resonates with you. It's interesting that our gut will actually have a really big impact on how you're spending your time, right? There are a lot of studies, a lot of like, our gut is our second brain, right? My GI doctor says that all the time. So our gut will actually be able to tell us if we are on the right track, right? We have to trust our authenticity, trust our intuition when it comes to those things. If you're like, oh, I think I know a lot about this particular subject and I think this would be a good idea, but it doesn't feel good, it doesn't feel authentic to you, and you're like, I don't really want to spend the next 3-6 months, maybe longer, on this particular idea, and I get stomach pains, I don't feel good when I'm working in this idea in this fashion, then that's probably not your book topic this year, right? So that's probably what I would consider doing. And then the same thing, you start with an audience in mind when you start writing. And then what happens is when you start mapping it out more, when you start outlining more, when you figure out what you really want to say, we can get even narrower in the niche that like who you want to serve in what you're writing.
Awesome. Thank you. This always goes by so fast when it's such a fascinating topic. So thank you, Danielle, and thank you for getting a lot of information in there. If anybody else has a question, email me. And because when this video is up, I will share the link with everybody, as well as some of the resources that Danielle has passed along. And if you have any other questions, I'll ask her to answer those in that follow-up email. So
I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to let you know in the chat, I put my Facebook group and my website. If you want to connect, I would love to connect with you guys further.
awesome. And I'll make sure that that's in there in the follow-up email as well. So thank you, everybody. Also look for some upcoming coffee breaks. We got some more topics that that I think are pretty fun. So Danielle, thank you. This was amazing. And thank you all for joining me for a few minutes.
You're welcome. Thank you guys so
Randy.
much.
All right, everybody have a good rest of the day.